Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we are changing the mental health narrative, bringing hope and solutions. Here's your host, Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist.
Dr. Karen Brown grew up around the world as a military dependent. She followed in her father's footsteps by joining the United States Army, where she spent 26 years as a combat medic, honing her understanding, awareness, and love for culture, inclusion, and international engagement. Currently, Dr. Brown is an adjunct professor at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, where she teaches courses at the master's and doctoral level and is a dissertation chairperson, providing mentorship and guidance to 10 doctoral students and candidates. Well, Dr. Brown, thank you so much for joining us here this morning.
Thank you for having me.
I was hoping you could start us off by telling us a little bit about how you got into the work you're doing and what drives your passion for it.
Yes, that's a very good question. I really, honestly, fell into a lot of what I'm doing right now. I was a military brat. My father was in the military, and that allowed me to travel as a child and to develop this love of culture and people. And then I graduated from college and joined the Army. And so I was a combat medic, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I found that, military medicine is amazing. And we can fix pretty much anything. We can give you new legs, new arms, new eyes, new heart, right? But we were having a little bit of difficulty with mental health. So I pivoted from medicine, physical medicine, and I got a master's in forensic psychology, which I absolutely love because it really talks about the etiology of mental health and why people do the things that they do and what are the impetus for behavioral patterns and the way that people think. And then I got a doctorate in international psychology, which actually talks about cultures and how cultures interact and how they work with one another. And that just kind of meshed with everything that I was doing. So what is my passion? My passion is people. My passion is seeing people, be healed physically, emotionally, behaviorally, psychologically, spiritually, all of the above. That's my passion. And whatever it is that I can do to facilitate that, I think that I jump right in. And so a lot of the things that I've been doing have just kind of fallen in my lap. People have talked to me and I kind of come up with a solution or a way forward. And it ends up being something that happens on a continuous basis. I moved here to Crestview, Florida 7 years ago. And there was nothing for the young people to do here in order to have any movies or anything, simple things like that. You'd have to drive about 30 miles to a different city. So I went to the high school and I conducted a survey, and I got 285 responses. And the question simply was, what would you like to do outside of school activities? And I got 285 responses. And I took that to the city, Parks and Rec department, and said, hey, here's what the kids want to do outside of school activities. How can I help you do this? And they said, I tell you what, we really don't have time, but how about you do it and we'll help you to facilitate these. So they gave me, the monies to put on activities and events for our young people. That turned into what we now call the Crestview Youth Coalition, where I work with young people, not just with activities and events, but mentoring, tutoring, and also in mental health aspects. Again, not within the school system, but outside of the school system where they are allowed to come and talk not just to myself, but we do have some licensed clinical social workers who volunteer their time after hours to come and talk to these young people about uh, the pressures that are happening in our schools and in our young people. We know that, social media is huge and it has a huge impact. And so that's one thing. The other thing that I'm working with is with our seniors. We talked to them because when they were during COVID and they were secluded and isolated, I was able to go in. My mother's in a living assisted facility, so I was able to go in and again read with our seniors, talk to them, have some light exercise, and then I was able to talk with some of our local retirees in the area to come and join me, and so that program is up and running, and so just my passion is to help people to heal and to feel that life is worth living, and not just for our young people, but for anyone who's feeling like life doesn't matter. And we push that life matters, life is worth living. Don't just think about what's happening today. Think 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years in the future. Is what you're dealing with right now going to matter in 2 weeks? If it does matter, then you have to make it to the next 2 weeks, right? If it doesn't matter, let's see what we can do. How can we convince you that the next 2 weeks is going to matter? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, very, very much so. And I understand that you're also an adjunct professor at the Chicago School, is it? Of Professional
Yes,
Psychology?
yes, yes. So again, that kind of fell in my lap. There were students that were assigned to a particular course, and they had too many students and not enough teachers. So I got a call from the dean, said, "Hey, would you help us out and teach this course because we have too many students?" And of course, I said yes. And it was a course on violence and mass terrorism, and which I knew a bit about from being in the military and being a forensic psychologist. I knew quite a bit about that. So I started teaching that course, and I thought it was going to be a one-time thing. And it turned into a consistent. So I teach every term now, mostly, courses on genocide, violence, mass violence, terrorism, things of that sort. And then I'm also a dissertation chair. Currently, I have 13 students, two of which just recently graduated with their doctoral degree. And most of them are dealing with topics that deal with trauma. I believe that I call myself an indigenous psychologist because I look outside of Western psychology and I really embrace the indigenous psychologies that talk about, the holistic nature of life and the holistic nature of well-being, which not only includes, the body, but it really talks about the individual, how the individual connects with the community, with the family, how the family connects with the community connects with the land, and then the land holistically connects, with the cosmos. And so there's a circle. It's a holistic circle. And what the indigenous psychologies believe is that if one of those things is removed from that circle, then that's when you have what we in Western medicine call a mental health defect or a mental health breakdown. And so they really, really focus on ensuring that all pieces of that circular puzzle are in right standing. So I love that, and I think it's something that we should look more closely at as Western medicine, because it really speaks to how family and community work together, and understanding their connection to where they are, and how that all connects with the greater cosmos, or the greater, spiritual beings that we really are.
So what aspect of the genocides are you teaching? Certainly not the how-to.
No, 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 no. Well, we talk about background, how they kind of what prompted the genocides, and how people are reacting. So we look at the historical, the socio-political underpinnings of genocide, and then the trauma afterwards, and how to deal with that trauma. My focus for my dissertation was transgenerational trauma. So when we talk about genocide and the aftermath of genocide, what do we do with those survivors, and how do we help them heal from that trauma and the trauma that continues to follow them transgenerationally?
So what would you like to focus on in today's conversation? Because I think I made it somewhat clear that even though I was on this board and about the Integrated Mental Health Summit this year, I wasn't as involved in the planning and the list of speakers as I was last year. So my interest in having you on the interview came from just your comments on Friday when you were just a participant, like a listener and having comments. And I didn't even know you were presenting with these other fabulous people the next day. So
Right.
I know there's a broad range of things we could talk about. The focus of the On Your Mind podcast being to try and help people understand there's a lot more than just here's a list of symptoms and here's a list of medications, and that's what we do in mental health. What aspect of your life experience and your work, either past, current, or maybe a future project you're starting, would you like to highlight for today?
Well, I look at it uh, in a holistic way. So I deal with a lot of trauma, and some of that trauma, it manifests behaviorally, but sometimes it manifests emotionally and psychologically. So we have to deal with the whole gamut of emotions and behaviors and thought patterns. And so I did a project in Australia with the Australian Aboriginals in Perth. It's the Noongar family kinship group. And we found that they were suffering from transgenerational trauma. And so we developed a transgenerational healing model, or transgenerational trauma healing model, that takes into account the historical, the socio-political, the behavioral aspects of transgenerational trauma and the whole nine. And from that, we also developed what we call the course training model, not only to help those who are suffering from these types of historical and long-term traumas, but also to provide assistance to those who are working with them, and then just the general population, to kind of change the culture of how we see one another. And I think a lot of times when we're talking about depression and anxiety and different, what Western medicine would call mental health defects, the rest of the world, the indigenous population, looks at it that there's something out of whack in the holistic uh, outlook of life. And what we found is that in a lot of indigenous population groups, they see health or well-being as being not disconnected. So the body is not disconnected from the mind, and vice versa. And what we see in Western medicine, and I was a combat medic for a long time, 26 years, and we would always have our military members, if they needed some physical medicine, they would come and see us. But if they needed some type of behavioral health or mental health situation, we had to refer them out to a specialist. Like there was uh,
A separation there, yeah.
separation, right? And then we kind of figured out that as a man thinketh, so is he. So we kind of tried to start trying to combine those thought patterns. Those who have been severely injured, we look at how they feel about life, and their mental health, their thought patterns, and that, if they're happy, they get better faster. So we're working on that now in military medicine. However, I think we have a long way to go, and I think um, there's not a lot of impetus really to really delve into that and make it happen on a consistent basis.
As you were talking, I was thinking about the last thing was the I think it's 360 VA. There's a general and a colonel that I interviewed who had met over in Germany, and he was responsible for this base over there, 40,000 people with the enlisted people plus their families and whatever. And suicide rate was going through the roof. And he said, we can't have this. So he enlisted this colonel she had all kinds of expertise and training, but science-based. And they put together a program to try and cap that and decrease that suicide rate. And it was so successful and it was science-based that then after they retired, then now they're starting to do it. They formed a company, and their names will come to me, or I'll look them up and send them to you. But they did an interview here, and very focused on trying to make sure that we take care of our active duty and veterans, primarily with this whole approach. So there's things like yoga and EFT tapping and mindfulness based, all the stuff that's research verified, into a program. I think they had a 4-week program, and they were making it available to all these people free. And of course, they're trying to get more and more people enlisted. And the other thing I thought of was, you're talking about the transgenerational stuff. After I got my doctorate, my business partner and I decided to go to an advanced family therapy seminar, whatever you want to call it. It ran for a year. It was 9 separate sessions. We had the 3 months off in the summer, and we were given some homework to do. But what would happen is we would sit with a woman who was an MD psychiatrist, but very well, back then, the psychiatrists didn't just do meds. They were trained in the therapies and the analysis and all that stuff. So she sat and did a genogram with each of us, where she would sit in front of a board with these, the great big white board of paper and on the palette, and she would start asking us questions, and she'd take notes. And men were squares and women are circles. Are you familiar with that genogram model?
Yes.
So she would map that out going up as far back as we could remember, and then she would come back down and make little squiggly lines or red or whatever as she talked about the relationships between the people. Now here's a room full of therapists, the least experienced therapist in the room. We're talking master's and doctorate level therapists, probably 13 of us. The least experienced had 15 years of experience doing therapy. And we sat there, and to a person, as we sat in the chair telling Dr. Kramer what to write on the board, people around us were gasping, and we're going, what? I don't get it, right? Nobody saw the patterns that they were describing, because we were just say this person was this age and she was married to him and he was her. And everybody in the room saw patterns and would gasp and say, oh, isn't that interesting? Or, oh my God, you can't do that. Or, oh, look at that. And we were blind, absolutely blind to the patterns we were living in and telling the genogram therapist about.
Right.
The most powerful was a woman who had every one of us convinced, including me. And I was one who said, keep the family together, go the extra mile, don't get divorced, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time we were 5 or 6 months into this, even I had rolled over and said, well, yeah, maybe you have to send your 12-year-old daughter to a residential facility, because if she's that disruptive and she's causing that much violence in the home, et cetera. When she got in the hot seat and she did her genogram, as she's coming back down, she's about halfway back down the page, and we all said almost in unison, you cannot send your daughter away. And she goes, what do you mean? If she sent her daughter away, this is a master's level therapist, social worker with at least 15 years, maybe 20 years experience doing therapy. If she would send her daughter away, it would have been the 5th generation in which the second oldest daughter had been sent from the house between the ages of 10 and 12. And she said, no, it's got nothing to do with it. We lived in the South on a farm. Of course they would send the second oldest daughter away, because she was just another mouth to feed. After you have the first daughter and she can change the diapers and help with the cooking, she can't work in the field. So of course you'd send her over to a family or a county away this blind. That's what I was thinking of when you were talking about the indigenous and the cross-generational. And it's the lack of awareness of that and the complete blindness to those issues that keeps them in the power position.
Right.
Right? Because whatever the strongest resonant energy is within my system that I'm not aware of is going to drive my behavior in the next moment.
Exactly. Exactly. And what we find and what we have found is that those transgenerational traumas, those traumas that we don't even pay attention to, that are past, and so that's why I'm really interested in what they're doing with this epigenetic study. I'm not completely convinced about that because I'm a biologist by nature, by training. As an undergrad, I was a biology major. And so I do understand the chemicals that can change, DNA and things like that. So I look at the epigenetics that Dr. Mintz is talking about, and so it has to make sense in my own mind. And I do realize that the way that we kind of look at life, you know, it informs how we treat each other, and it definitely informs how we raise our children. And so sometimes, like you said, not even realizing, we will exhibit behaviors that will cause our children and our siblings and those that are around us to react a certain way based on our actions or reactions or interactions. And so you continue that trauma, just, I mean, it can go indefinitely. And I think that what we do in our course model, we have this family tree, and we talk about, like you said, your parents and your grandparents and your siblings and your great uncle and all of this, this whole tree. And then we talk about how this informs how you view the world. So it kind of informs your global worldview. When you can understand why you see the world the way you see the world, then you can take steps to start trying to tweak that. And we're not asking people to change their personality, because pretty much their personality is set. But they can, those things that those behaviors can be modified. And if you can modify behavior for a certain amount of time, then it actually changes. So we try to influence those things with their, with their stories and with what our understanding of transgenerational trauma.
So let me ask you to back up and say, what is it that you're not buying into about epigenetics?
So with the trauma, Dr. Mintz and I have had this discussion on many occasions. So the actual trauma can be passed along to our kids. So my thought process, as someone who deals with understanding biology, I do understand someone is traumatized, and there's some type of hormone or chemical that's released. And in a pregnant woman, that hormone or that chemical can be passed, along to the child, which then that child, it turns on that whatever that trigger is, it turns it on. I got that, right? But if I'm already here, I'm already alive, and what we found in this Aboriginal population group, the traumas that first, let me say this: transgenerational trauma is not a psychological issue; it's a behavioral issue, which then turns into a physical issue, because the behaviors inform the way that they act. So they have a higher prevalence of substance use and abuse. They have a higher prevalence of, based on that, like diabetes, high blood pressure, things of that sort are prevalent. They have a higher instance of not just substance use and abuse, but also domestic violence. Also, they have a higher number of our population group that are incarcerated, things of that sort. So a lot of it is behavioral, which then kind of informs their physical disease process. They have a shorter lifespan, those that suffer from transgenerational trauma. And a lot of it has to deal with the way that they see the world and the way that they view others, and also the way that they view themselves. So they're almost caught in a circular pattern. And so what we've done, I just asked the question, what do you think you need in order to heal? And so they came up with a series of things that they want to do, like regain their understanding of their history and heritage, which was taken away from them. They have restarted relearning the language.
So you're talking about the Aboriginals?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. A reconnection with their history and their culture, which was destroyed. So we call it cultural genocide. And so just kind of restoring that and going back to the basics again, talking, and they didn't have a written history. So they've reintegrated and re-energized their oral history, and they're passing that along. They also go out into the outback. They take young people to the outback and they teach them the power of healing that comes from the flowers and the plants and things that they have learned over time that sometimes have forgotten. Some of them have forgotten. And so just a reconnection, a relearning, and trying to have some pride in being an Aboriginal, which it's really helping. And so actually we're on year 4. We got kind of sidetracked during the first the 2020 and 2021 with the pandemic, where we couldn't kind of work on that, but they're actually opening up a healing center in Perth. And so they'll be doing a lot more of those things. So we was looking at a 5-year study to see how well it works. And right now, just some preliminary data says that it's really working, because the people there are understanding that there is a way out. There's a way forward.
And what are the outcome measures you're saying that are indicating that it's working?
There are less domestic violence being reported. There are fewer substance use and abuse, excuse me, incidents. Also, so they go to the outback. There are more people signing up to go. There are more people being involved in community activities. Whereas, at the beginning, it was a free for all. I'm doing whatever. Like I said, it's behavioral, and they're also sharing their knowledge of Indigenous medical practices with mainstream Australians, and they're allowing some of those things that they've learned over the years in terms of medical healing. They're being invited to hospitals to kind of work with those population groups that enter into that, because at one time they were disallowed from entering the hospitals, and so if they had something wrong with them, they had to stay outside on the not really the balcony, but the porch, and they were being treated out there on the porch. So now, and then with the shamans that come in, they weren't allowed to into the hospitals. So there were a lot of elders that didn't trust the medical system. That's changing now, just based on understanding, and also with the mainstream population in Australia just accepting some of those things that initially they were not accepting.
Wonderful. So as you look at the trauma, transgenerational trauma, individual trauma, what kinds of offerings for resolution of the effects of trauma do you find that you're using most often or promoting either in your projects or your coursework?
So one is resilience. So we do resilience training and letting them know that, um, you know, trauma, well, the individual trauma, a lot of it is um, I want to say temporary. It's a temporary trauma. It's not an ongoing trauma. And so with those temporary traumas, we can allow, we talk to them and allow them to understand that, um, look at the trauma, see where you were prior to the trauma, and see where you can still go after the trauma. So the trauma doesn't define you. We also, we talk a lot about spirituality, whatever that may mean to the individual. What does that mean? Looking outside of yourself for a purpose. Also, understanding that, like I said, the trauma doesn't define you. What is it that you enjoy? A lot of times, it's music or some type of art. We engage them in those art practices, whether it be drawing, writing, singing, rapping, dancing, those types of things. And then, because I deal with a lot of military members, prior military members, police officers, the physical exercise. So challenging themselves. And thank goodness we have here locally, there's a 7th Special Forces group. There's well, they don't call it an obstacle course anymore. It's a confidence course. So just getting out there, working as a team, having to rely on someone other than yourself, and to also have the opportunity to help someone else, kind of draws them out of that space of, this happened to me and I can't move forward. We give them those opportunities to work with young kids. We give them opportunities to go out to the schools here, to read books to the kids, to just have lunch with them. Also to go to senior citizens homes and just walk through and talk to the elder, to our seniors, to read stories to them, to play checkers with them, something that doesn't, cause them to think too heavily about what's happening, and then to just kind of relax. And like you said, yoga is a great way to do that. So physical exercise, challenging themselves to think outside of where they are, and then to really look at what actually happened. And a lot of what I find is a lot of our behavioral health specialists don't want to really talk about the issue. They want to talk about the aftermath and how it makes them feel and how they, don't like to be around crowds and things of that sort. But we look at the actual, what happened, what could you have done to mitigate that? And if you couldn't, then you just, we try to talk about, you can't take on that fault or that guilt, because a lot of times what I have found is that, and I have to speak for myself as well, because I did it within myself as well, to think, okay, what could I have done differently? And if I could not have done anything differently, then I have to understand that I was trained to handle a situation, but not every situation can be handled. And so I have to live with that, deal with it, and then let it go. Right. And it's not an easy thing to do, because we always want to think that we could have done it better, or maybe it was my fault, or if I had have just, went a little bit further or a little bit harder, or, we have come up with all of these things. And so we try to stop the catastrophizing. We try to stop the wondering what ifs, because what ifs will take you down this, this long spiral, and just deal with the what actually happened. And if I know that I did my absolute best, then now I just have to accept it and move on. And it's a difficult thing to do, but we've done enough of it to where there have, of course, not everybody is, comes along at the same pace, but with the group, I think it works better because we can hear each other's stories, and because a lot of times in our own silos we think um, I'm the worst person, or it's happening to nobody but me. So we put them in groups, and so when they hear the next person's story, it's like, oh, wait a minute, that happened to you, and I looked at you as being this amazing person, and you're telling me that you're still having struggles, and so it works. It helps us all just kind of realize that, what, life happens. Life is going to continue to happen. And so, how do we deal with life? Well, we have to have resilience. We have to recognize that we can't control everything, and that when bad things do happen, we can bounce back from it. And it may take a minute, but we have to allow ourselves to heal. Sometimes we don't want to heal because we feel guilt, right? I made it and someone else didn't. We have to release that guilt and recognize that, and that's where the spirituality comes in. Whatever you believe, and most of them are Christians, and so we go that route and let them know, God is in control. And so if God allowed this, and He says that He will never put more on you than you can bear, and it feels like I cannot bear this, but every day that you wake up, you have to say, I'm still here, right? That means you can bear it.
So when you're talking about this and putting people in groups, what's the context? You're working with these people as in veterans groups? You're working with them where?
So I'm not in the DoD system, and so it's very, um, actually happened very organically. I was talking to a group of, I was doing a class, I was doing a um, critical thinking skills class with a group of seventh group soldiers, active duty soldiers. During the breaks, we would talk, and so they just kind of started talking, and we just kind of, I got into my spiel, and afterwards we kept talking, and so we kind of meet at different places um, outside of the post, and just kind of chit chat and talk, and then more people started coming in, and so it's not something that I get paid to do. That's not what I'm in it for. I'm in it to help. It's not something that is in the DoD system, because what they recognize and what we all recognize is that when they see behavioral health in within the DoD system, it's recorded, and so these are guys who are concerned about future promotions, advancements, unit placements, and things of that sort. So we've gotten to the point where we'll just meet maybe once every couple of months, every couple of weeks, we'll meet somewhere, and or they'll text me and say, hey, we got a new guy, can we meet? And we'll go to one of the local parks and just kind of sit around and talk, and or sometimes they will do it themselves. They'll talk, and then they'll call me and say, hey, we got this guy, and here's what's going on, and here's what we did, and want to just make sure that we're clear. So it happened very, very organically.
So that's an ongoing thing, but it's not your primary focus.
It's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's this kind of volunteer thing that you're taking some of the expertise you're learning in your studies, and you work with the indigenous and the cross-generational trauma, and you're bringing it to bear with veterans and active duty people.
Yes. Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I wonder if you can just take a moment here and think about the various things that we've discussed. If we look at being, somewhat low on time, what's something you've already discussed that you want to go back and highlight, or something about you and your work that we haven't even touched on yet?
Yes. So I do want to touch on a training model that we came up with. I actually started a company called LINC International, It's a um, consultation company, consultancy. And one of the big things that we teach is called the course training model. And the course, it's COURSE, and it stands for cultural honesty, operating in context, understanding biases, recognition of others, self reflection, and then education or emulation of others. And so basically, what that course model does, it allows people to understand the impact of their own inherent biases on themselves and on others. It allows them to recognize why they see the world the way that they see the world. It provides for a time of self-reflection, for personal development, to increase cross-cultural connections and communication. And it also allows them to understand what cultural context is. So when we teach that model, we teach it in several stages, and we like to take about 6 months to do it. So it gives the participants an opportunity to kind of reflect on each module. And it can be done in separate modules, but we like to do it as a complete course, because at the end, when we talk about educating emulation, what we would like for our participants to do is to take those first set of modules and then emulate that so that others can see that behavior. And we believe that using that model, we change perspectives. We don't want to try to change people's character. We just want to allow them or give them an opportunity to entertain alternative perspectives. And if you can get someone to consider entertaining an alternative perspective, then it opens their minds up to different things, different ways to behave, different ways to see the world. So we ask them to first have an open mind. We ask them to be willing to interact with others with a positive mindset. We ask them to be willing, again, to see that alternative perspective, whether they believe it or not. If they would entertain that there is an alternative perspective, we call that a win. And then we ask them to be willing to self-reflect and to positively exchange with one another, whether they have the same understanding, or even if it's something that they are wanting to debate, just to hear. And I guess at the bottom line is, there's an old adage that says you don't know the next person until you walk a mile in his or her shoes. And so at the end of the day, that's what we're asking people to do. Consider walking a mile in someone else's shoes, and then make a decision about who they are, why they do what they do, and most importantly, why those triggers, why those things that they say, do, or the way that they act trigger something in you, whether it's negative or positive. And I think when we talk about cultural honesty, it's about understanding yourself so that you're able to better understand others. And that's our course training model. I'm so excited about this training model. We've only done 2 iterations of this course. It is patented, but we just want to get that training model out there.
So where have you done it? Are you doing it in schools or businesses? Where are you doing it?
Well, we did it at a church in Los Angeles. So I have a business partner who lives in Los Angeles. So we conducted one iteration at a church in Los Angeles who were having some disruptions. And so we conducted it there, and it actually was great. They're actually still working on some of the modules that we gave them, in terms of stepping back and going back to why does that bother me, or why am I having this particular reaction? And so that's a huge step forward for us, that we can have people stop and think about, okay, I reacted to this. What was in that? Not the person. What was in that caused me to react. So, and we're getting, emails and phone calls saying, "Hey, I did this and I thought about it, and it was really something that, because we are a product of our experiences. It was something that happened, to my parents, and I picked that up." And that's where we talk about the transgenerational trauma. I picked it up from their attitude, or from their, how they reacted, and so I reacted. Um, so we did it there in Los Angeles, and we've also done it in a small portion here in the city of Crestview, Florida, with the city management. So we had a few of the people from City Hall that went very, very quickly through the course. Um, it didn't take 6 months. It was more like 6 days. And we just kind of briefly went over the concepts. But even in that small time frame, we got some positive reaction and interaction. Again, our city manager is great. He really encouraged that for his leaders. And so we did it really quickly, not getting into too much depth with them, but the responses were extremely positive. And again, they're still looking at those concepts and saying, it really helped me to think about why I reacted this way, or why I insist upon doing things this way. When people come with different ideas, why do I balk at those different ideas? Well, it's because of my experiences, and so it really has helped them. And I would hope that we're able to expand, who we're working with. I'm trying to put this into our school district as well, for our principals and vice principals.
So can you give us the name of the company, and then once again, the acronym, what the course stands for?
So the company is Infinity LINC International. It's an LLC. And the course, it's a course training model, COURSE. The C is for cultural honesty. The O is for operating in context. The U is for understanding biases. The R is for recognition of others. The S is self-reflection, and the E is education and emulation.
Well, if people wanted to find out more about that, where would we direct them?
So we do have a website. It's infinitylinkinternational.org, or they can contact me directly. And I have my email address is karen.brown@gmail.com, or brownkb6567@gmail.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a delight hearing more about what you're doing. I hope you keep us posted about how this project goes as you launch the course program.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Karen Brown grew up around the world as a military dependent. She followed in her father's footsteps by joining the United States Army, where she spent 26 years as a combat medic, honing her understanding, awareness, and love for culture, inclusion, and international engagement. Currently, Dr. Brown is an adjunct professor at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, where she teaches courses at the master's and doctoral level and is a dissertation chairperson, providing mentorship and guidance to 10 doctoral students and candidates. She is a published author and has written several articles for Indigenous newsletters circulated in Australia. She is the owner and founder of Infinity, LINC International, a training and consulting company. She is the founder and chief facilitator for the Crestview Youth Coalition, a grassroots organization that focuses on supporting the youth in Crestview, Florida, and its surrounding areas. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Life Sciences from Kansas State University, a Master's in Forensic Psychology, and a Ph.D. in International Psychology, both from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Dr. Brown's dissertation research focused on transgenerational trauma, its resulting effects, and ways to mitigate those effects. She is an all-around performer who has demonstrated focused leadership and unwavering commitment to integrity at the highest levels of academia and her career choices.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.